Welcome to Breaking News Plus on this Friday night, somber day in the state of Minnesota as thousands of people go pay their respects to Melissa and Mark Hortman at the Capitol, and then tomorrow at a private funeral. Lou Raguse is with us tonight. He's been covering the case itself. The suspect, Vance Boelter, also had some things happen with him today. So Vance Boelter was in court, right?
Yeah, and so just coincidentally, this court hearing was scheduled for today, the same day all this other stuff is going on. It was supposed to be a preliminary hearing, which in federal court is actually pretty interesting because they will call an investigator to testify and essentially put evidence out there so that the judge can decide, like, yes, there's enough evidence for this case to move forward. Okay. It's something that you don't really see in state court in Minnesota. In other states, maybe you do, but so it's always an interesting type of hearing to be present at, to watch. But as soon as it started, we knew something was off because Vance Boelter was led into the courtroom wearing this, what looked like, it almost looked like a green moving blanket, like those quilted blankets wrapped around him, attached with Velcro. But I was told that it's referred to as a pickle suit, which is like an anti-suicide smock. So it's like clothing, a kind of a clothing apparatus that inmates can wear if they are at risk of suicide because they can't take it apart and turn it into a noose to kill themselves.
Does it mean that the suspect Boelter has attempted to take his life while in custody?
Not necessarily. In fact, there's no evidence, there's no reports of that. But in a case like this, that's a major precaution. Like if you think about other high-profile cases where the huge charges are looming and suicide is a possibility, they want to prevent that from happening. So it's, I would say, not unusual that he was put on suicide watch. However, his attorney got up right away and started complaining that, she hasn't been able to communicate with him very well so far because he's very sleep deprived. The lights are on 24/7 in his cell. He doesn't really have much to sleep on, a mat with no pillow. And she said that there's constant banging doors and the inmate right next door is spreading feces that is distracting and disgusting to smell. And so she hasn't been able to review the case with him and therefore asked for this hearing to be delayed. And the judge agreed to do that. So the hearing that was supposed to take place today will happen next Thursday, July 3rd.
So you didn't, as you started out, you didn't hear from a person kind of from the prosecution side, so the Fed side, come out and give kind of clues about where this case was going to go, because there's this complaint that he's not in conditions that are conducive to him being fully aware? Yeah,
it was essentially a motion for a continuance because the attorney has not had time to fully discuss the case with him yet. And this type of hearing, almost always the preliminary hearing, there's enough evidence that the case moved forward. Like just recent high-profile ones that we've covered is the former Republican lawmaker that was caught in a sting in Bloomington, Justin Eichorn. He had a preliminary hearing, and an officer testified about all the evidence and all the reasons that led to his arrest. And then the judge says, yes, there's enough probable cause to move this forward. And that's kind of how that process works.
So if the complaint is they don't like, and the suspect's being held in the Sherburne County Jail, Sherburne County, Minnesota, it has a contract with the federal government to house federal inmates, which he is one now. So he's complaining about his jail conditions because he's been placed on this watch? Are they saying, I don't want to be on suicide watch?
Well, interestingly, Vance Boelter addressed the judge because the judge had to make sure that he's okay with this delay because constitutionally he can have this preliminary hearing within 14 days of being arrested. You're right. And so he said, yes, Your Honor, I appreciate the delay, and I just want to state that I'm not suicidal and I never have been suicidal. So that was his own words in court addressing the issue of why he's on suicide watch. But again, you think about like the Jeffrey Epstein case, being held in federal custody. They want to do everything to make sure that he survives so that he can be present at his court hearings.
Right. They want to prosecute this case. They want to lay out their evidence. I mean, obviously in the state of Minnesota, probably nationwide, there isn't a lot of sympathy if the suspected assassin isn't getting enough sleep.
Right.
Is that what he was asking the judge for? Like, feel sorry for me because I can't sleep?
Well, he did say, I appreciate the delay so that I can get some sleep. That was another statement that he made. However, what it really is that a defendant has a right to consult with their attorney. And if the attorney says, we haven't been able to consult on this and we're not prepared for this type of hearing today that involves cross-examining a detective, then the judge is like, yeah, it's fine. The government did not object to the delay. And so all sides were fine with it, and it will take place next Thursday. You know, there's not expected to be any surprises. Like, there's been an extraordinary amount of details in this case that have been made public already.
Yeah.
So not that there's anticipated being any major surprises. Another thing that they will argue is whether he can be released or stay in jail before his trial, and obviously he's not going to be released in a million years. It's like they call it a detention hearing, which is similar to a bail hearing, but the result will be that he will stay in jail. There's no question about that.
And this is just pops into my head as you discuss it, if that's what they're saying now. Are they trying to kick the can down the road? Can they again come back next Thursday, say, hey, Judge, the jail conditions still stink. We haven't been able to get ready?
Theoretically, they could. However, the judge asked them to talk with the Sherburne County Jail to review whether it's needed to keep him on suicide watch. And his attorney did say during the hearing that it's her understanding that they're going to move him to segregation, which is still separate from all the other inmates, but yet not on this suicide watch where the lights are on 24/7.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you, because I think I recall Derek Chauvin being placed in this segregation type thing, and one would think that you would need to put Boelter in a similar situation so he couldn't run the risk of being harmed by other inmates?
Yes, absolutely. A high-profile inmate like that, you know, they are definitely at danger of being harmed by other inmates.
Right. So that's what segregation does,
Yes.
but maybe gets that other part that he's complaining about.
Right.
Lou, the question I think I get asked most often over the last 5 days is the whole situation with Boelter's wife. The cash in the car, the guns in the car, when they finally have a conversation with her, she comes out with a statement, I think it was yesterday, saying she's shocked and here's what she's done and she's cooperated. People want to know if she had guns, passports, and cash in a car, why she's not in jail. She did.
She did.
But why is
fact.
she not incarcerated?
Well, because what is the crime that she would be arrested for? And I think that that's still the open question, and that's what she's still being investigated for. Her name hasn't been cleared, so to speak, but she also hasn't been charged with a crime. And so is there any evidence that she either helped him plan the attacks or carry them out in any way? Or is there any evidence that she's an accessory after the fact, as in helping him get away with it after he did it? So those would be potential crimes that they're looking into. But is there any evidence of that? Or is it, as they say on the surface level, that they were these doomsday preppers and they had a plan like, if I give you the word, grab the passports and the cash and meet at your mother's cabin in Wisconsin. Like, if that's a plan that they had worked out and she didn't ask other questions when he gave her the note to execute the bailout plan, maybe there was no crime committed.
Meaning if he didn't say, as a part of the bailout safe word for her to flee, what he did to make her do that, or what he did and why he's activating the plan.
Those are the unanswered questions.
Okay.
Like, did he call and say, you know, I just killed these people, and in order to help me get away, you need to bring the passports and we'll meet at our spot that we had planned? That potentially could be a crime, but we don't know if that's how it took place.
And then is there any steps, or should there be any steps or anything that you've heard that makes sure she stays in place? Because I would assume, again, she's a central part to the investigation.
Well, now that she has legal counsel, because that statement was put out by the Hallberg law firm, which includes, you know, several high-profile defense attorneys, they can communicate with her through her counsel. Like, the government can talk to her attorneys and say, hey, we're wondering if she'll talk to us about this. It's kind of that mediation, that the attorney's like the middleman to communicate with her and also help keep track of her, so to speak, if they do need to bring her in. It's unclear to me if she's going to testify at the grand jury. So it's my understanding that there's going to be a federal grand jury to indict him in federal court, either on the charges that he's already charged with or potentially other charges if they find evidence of like a terrorism charge or something like that. It could be added in an indictment if they want to. But then I also have heard through sources that Mary Moriarty's office, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, wants to convene a grand jury as well. And so it's unclear.
Can you do too?
Yeah, she could hold a grand jury. It would just require subpoena the witnesses, the BCA agents, and then hand down an indictment, and I'm sure that she wants to do that. That doesn't change the calculus of how the cases are handled. It doesn't mean that hers would go first or anything like that, but it's just a procedural thing that she had promised that her office was going to do, and I expect that they will.
A lot of times in the work, especially that you do, we do, but more so you, because you do investigations like this, we get questions from you all about, well, are you putting too much focus on the person who did this, not the people who died? And my answer, I guess, to that right now is we are using almost all of our resources today as a news organization to honor Melissa and Mark Hortman, to continue to monitor the Hoffmans, Yvette and John, who were also shot. And this piece of it, too, though, is important as we learn more about not who is he and let's figure out who this guy was so we can tell great stories about him, but what is his motivation? Because I think the fear that I've heard from a lot of people is, how do we know it's not going to happen again?
Right. Yeah, I mean, as human beings, we all want answers, and even if the answers aren't going to make complete reasonable sense, people want to know why he did this or what the motivation was, and we as human beings all try to figure out how we can prevent it from happening again.
Sure.
And so those things all go into it. I would say this case, we've learned an extraordinary amount of details in a short period of time, which I think is a good thing, obviously, as a reporter and stuff like that. You hear about other cases where the details don't come out,
right,
and those conspiracies pop up. Why are we not learning more about this? How come this is? I think it's
the man that shot President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. We know next to nothing about him.
And so that's a perfect example. This has kind of been the opposite of that. Of course, this suspect survived, and so he's going to be put on trial, and more details will come out. And there's just those. We've learned so much, but we haven't heard what the underlying rationale in his head for why he did this was. So until we get to that point, I think those questions are going to remain.
Right, and even if that's going to make any sense, obviously it's a heinous assassination, so it's not going to make sense to a law-abiding citizen. But it's something too, this is the type of case, in my opinion, and you and I talk quite a bit about this and just have been today, that there are so many oddities about it. Nothing about his past really makes sense, his work history, having boatloads of cash, the preppers, being dressed up as a police officer, having the car. There are so many routes for you as the news consumer to go down in terms of rabbit holes of conspiracy that it can just feel easy to get bubbled up in one thing. And I guess what we have found out, you mostly, is that don't hang your hat on one thing. He was on the early one, which was, Governor Walz appointed him to a board, which we have reported that there are hundreds of those boards.
I mean, to me, that's essentially meaningless.
It's meaningless. Yeah. But just letting it go there. Or, I heard his roommate say he voted for President Trump, so he's that thing. There isn't one thing to hang your hat on here.
I mean, as far as politics go, I think it's very clear that he is a lifelong conservative voter, and the only people that were on his list that he wanted to kill, all this allegedly, of course, were Democrats.
Right.
So we know those things.
Right.
Those are facts already that we've been reporting. But as far as early on, there was a lot of talk about abortion being a major issue, and just in the first couple of days his friend said that he definitely is anti-abortion, but was that a driving factor in why he committed these crimes? It's starting to look like not so much.
Okay.
And so, and like you mentioned, when the reasons or the rationale comes out, it's probably not going to make a lot of sense, but it's probably not going to be such an easy answer, such as he hated abortion so much that he wanted to kill pro-life people. A plus B equals C. Yeah. And, as far as how did he have this money and stuff, I've had some recent conversations with some lifelong friends of his who said that he actually was very successful in the business world when he worked in the food supply industry. And he was good with his money and always owned a home with his family and would work to pay off the home, and then he would sell it and buy another home with the equity. And so he was smart with his money in that way, to the point that at this point in his life, it makes sense to them that he had a $500,000 home that was fully paid off and all these vehicles. And
all his cash.
And for whatever reason, wanted to start a security company and had quit his other jobs and was taking part-time work working for funeral homes. I mean, it all sounds bizarre, but to the people that know him, they're like, well, he just wanted to do something different. He wanted to get this security company off the ground, and that's why he was doing those part-time jobs just to pay the bills in the meantime. But they say that he did have a nest egg. You know, he owned this home outright down in Green Isle, and so he just was smart with money throughout his life. He's 50 whatever years old at this point.
And for whatever reason, we get to the point that we get to on June 14th. And so that's kind of where we are. That's what happened in court today. That's where Lou is with his work on the suspect. Stay with us on all of our channels, both streaming and on KARE 11, as we memorialize the Hortmans tonight. Thanks for watching Breaking the News Plus. We'll see you.